Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies podcast, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers talk about geopolitics, veteran issues, science, and engineering, and everything in between. I'm Pearson Guest, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
Going great, Pearson. It is gorgeous outside. October in this part of Oregon is beautiful.
Nice. We're still in a heat wave down here. It's like a nice, brisk 97 degrees in the South Bay area, and it broke 100 a couple times down here. But I'm glad you guys are enjoying the weather, that nice October weather. I love that time of the year in Portland, by the way.
It's really nice. The temperature stays in the high 60s. The sun comes out. It's crisp in the morning. It warms up a little bit throughout the day. Perfect.
Yeah. And then, well, now you just derailed me, but that's perfect. I do like that weather. So we're on episode number 27. Good thing Brian will be able to deal with the intro. He'll have to become creative with the music. We're on episode 27, and I don't know what we're going to talk about during episode 27. I think we're going to talk about some globalization. But first, we're going to talk about this good news story. In a world of doom and gloom, bad news, we like to start the day off and our episode off with some good news. So what do you got for us today, Richard?
The document that I'm looking at here, I'm going to look at the cover page for a second. This is called the United States Energy and Employment Report for 2024. This can be sourced from energy.gov/USEER. And this is one of those white papers the DOE puts out to talk about what's happening in the energy sector with regard to this major project that has been put into place by the Biden administration.
So I just want to say real quick, because there's so much here, but because of a specific guest you had visit recently from a national lab, I wanted to ask a quick question. Where does the information for some of this for these reports usually come from? I'd like to ask real quick.
All right. So when we talk about the Department of Energy, we're talking about a distributed part of our government where the DOE sort of has a central office, but it has offices and employees and contractors and departments that work with it throughout the country at our national laboratories.
That's right.
Now, what's a national lab, you say? Is that...
I do, yes. That was my follow-up question. Thanks for reading my mind, Richard.
Yeah, exactly. It's a national lab where they do experiments on chimpanzees to figure out if they can fly jets on them by themselves.
Yeah, I've heard of these. The Area 51, right? That's the national labs we're talking about, where the aliens and Independence Day were hidden. No? Oh.
No, not at all. It turns out, not at all. One of the first, most famous national labs that we heard, that you and I heard of and that we talk about often is the National Lab at Los Alamos, where unless you're me and hiding under a rock, you know that recently there was a film about one of the principal scientists, the lead scientist, working at one of our national labs, specifically of Los Alamos, in the development of what? The atomic bomb.
Yeah.
National labs are located around the country, and they began their humble beginnings sort of had to do with their location to and their involvement with some of our major universities. And then they kind of separated somewhat because of the nature of defense secrecy and so forth. And so you have a lab like Los Alamos, which is really remote place for the atomic scientists to work together to create this, what potentially was a war-ending piece of ordnance. But what generated the matter and the technologies they used at Los Alamos to create that device was developed at laboratories like that of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, you can still visit and tour a couple of different museums and historical centers that talk about this building that was a 1/4 mile long and several floors high called K25. And so K25 is the place where the Manhattan Project separated U-238 from U-235, which is to say the two isotopes of uranium.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Because they're looking for that much more rare isotope, because that isotope is much more, I'm going to say it's unstable. In other words, it fissiles more readily than the more stable isotope does, which is more common.
So, bigger. I'm guessing this could translate to laymen who a bigger boom, maybe more intense boom,
or boom at all, for that matter.
Boom at all. Got it.
I'm sure that I'm going to be pilloried on my failing memory, because sometimes I want to remember it as being 238, which was the one that they were going for, but I believe it was 235. And when I say that, I'm working off of this flawed memory of mine where you want the odd number because the odd number is less stable than an even number in atomic weights.
Yes.
And so
because of the electron shell configuration, specifically, if I'm remembering deep in the annals of my chemistry classes. Please don't judge me, Dr. Petrovich.
The education that you and I have received and the interest that you and I have outside of the classroom are what they call perishable skills. And unless you work with them every single day, no matter how good you think you've got it, when you just got done studying it, it always kind of turns into vapor afterwards. Anyway, so one of the faculty that used to work at my university and that Pearson and I both have taken classes from now works at one of our national labs and routinely interacts with Department of Energy departments and Fields Department of Energy grants and other funding opportunities, and then tries to distribute those around the country to people in her network so that we can take advantage of this incredible age in building America's infrastructure back. Because that's the whole point. The Department of Energy is not just about creating atomic weapons. In fact, I don't think they ever were. That was something that came out of the mid-century.
Yeah.
But much more about the generation of let me try this again. Generation of, transmission of, and security of our energy infrastructure within the country. And that's everything from how we produce electricity from coal-fired power plants to nuclear plants to
natural gas,
to wind turbines, to solar installations, to some of the burgeoning grid-scale storage technologies that we talk about sometimes. In your industry, in hydro and pumped hydro, DOE has a regulatory influence.
I can speak on that, actually. There was a really cool report from 2022 that was released by a different national lab, I believe the one in Colorado. I want to say released a huge hydrology assessment of all 10,000 non-powered dams. So the U.S. has a crap ton of non-powered dams. And so they did a comprehensive environmental impact study of like all of these sites, looking at what it would cost to set up hydropower units, how close they were to existing infrastructure like substations, what it would require to hook them to the grid, existing grid infrastructure to facilitate these kind of transitions. It was a huge report, super awesome. And there are hydro companies that are out there, like micro hydro companies and hydro companies that are looking at those assessments and using that to get business, using the IRA and to get funding from local states and municipalities. So these reports have huge impacts on what the industry is doing. They allow and help facilitate growth within the private sector as well, within energy, which is really cool. So I know there's a number of micro hydro companies that reference that report as potential sites for business and for energy generation. And one of my favorite types of energy generation, hydro energy.
Hydro has proven itself to be a reliable base generation. Sometimes I want to say base load and base generation. I get the two switched around in my mind. But a base generator. And that's key to part of that infrastructure piece where there might be renewable energy assets on a grid, on a regional grid. There might be base generation from natural gas or coal fire or one of the other fossil fuel types of generation. You may see things like Covanta plants where they burn municipal trash to create energy. But what's really wonderful is if you can actually have a reliable hydro system in that portfolio of different generation, because except for under extreme climatic situations, which can happen occasionally,
drought or flooding,
yeah, you can expect some regular base generation, and then with that, the energy utility, depending on what parts of the matrix, what part of the matrix of assets they have control over, can dial down maybe a fossil fuel source, or they can shutter a wind source for maintenance, because maintenance can be so severe on some of these wind farms that take a lot of stresses from generating from wind. Or they can use hydro as a battery, the way that the pumped hydro industry does.
So, I mean, what's funny too is people don't know this, but we have hydro in our country, but we haven't utilized it in these ways that you're discussing. Like, these are a lot of the discussions that are happening right now. Some of the national lab reports have talked about utilizing pumped storage as hydro, right? Like currently there's dozens of pumped storage as hydro feasibility studies being conducted by us and other companies out there. These are capital intensive projects that span from 1.5 billion to 6 to even $9 billion-ish dollars. Not small projects, huge output. You know, we're talking gigawatts worth of energy potentially from these projects, but they're not significant. They're significant infrastructure build. So there's that. And then the other element is our current hydro infrastructure isn't necessarily set up for black start, even though hydropower fundamentally has black start capabilities with just some very small tweaks. It's just this infrastructure really hasn't been put in to effect with the greater hydro infrastructure that we have. It's just now that we're finally doing this. And I'm working on a number of projects where we're updating dams to have black start capability. And this has been an option that's been lying around for a long time. Now, what's black start capability, you ask?
Because I was just going to ask.
Of course. Now, I've explained this on our podcast before, but I'm sure it's good to kind of rehash something like this before. So when a grid experiences a blackout and let's say the California grid goes down, and this was the first summer so far that they haven't had to deal with rolling blackouts, which is nice. But during a blackout scenario, the grid is made up of a frequency of electricity, and that frequency is grid inertia, right? And this is made by a bunch of spinning machines, turbines that are spinning and adding inertia to the grid. And that is how the electric grid maintains its stability. Typically it has to be right there at 60 hertz. That's the magic number that we're always trying to balance the grid. And we're trying to balance reactive power and other things within the grid stability, within the grid. Now, when the grid goes down, we have to get that inertia back online. And typically what we've done is turned on generating units to add and kickstart that inertia back to the grid. So this has been typically your generators, your large diesel generators and large natural gas generators kick on, and then you have your coal fire plants kick on, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden you start to have grid inertia built up over time as you add loads and power sources onto the grid. Now, hydro has always naturally been we should be able to do this because hydropower is a natural AC generation source. So that means that you have a spinning frequency adding source that you can control with a flow of water. So it literally a mechanical control allows for a change in the flow, which will lead to a change in the frequency of power delivered. So this is a super cool, intrinsic property of hydropower specifically. However, we didn't design hydropower, our dams, to do this necessarily And now we're finally adding the necessary components to make this an option. So there's my Black Start kind of crash course. Of course, this is a really basic summary. I'm just doing it from memory. There's probably a bunch of electrical engineers out there who are like, well, anyways. But that's basically that's Black Start. So there you go.
Well, what do you say we return to this executive summary from this DOE document, since
that sounds like a good idea.
What is a national lab? What is DOE? I think our audience knows by now that you and I touch lightly on some topics sometimes, and knowing full well that, oh, would you like to know more about the DOE? You have the internet for that, everybody. Yeah. I know you can look that up. But we just want to specify that the Department of Energy is just one of many unbelievably important parts of our state bureaucracy that make a lot of what functions stay functioning.
And that it's made up of literally PhDs, professors that come from universities like ours who head like transformational degree programs like the renewable energy degree. They head that and they go to these places like national labs because this is full of the foremost nerds and experts within the field that are working here. These are subject matter experts within the field that are writing, that are the back end to these white papers that the DOE releases. So this is all of those bureaucratic officials and those people that work to become experts within their field and have full understanding and knowledge on the forefront of modern energy technology. So this is a really a cool thing to be lauded. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, this executive summary from this white paper starts out as this. In 2023, clean energy investments powered strong overall growth of jobs in the energy sector. Unionization rates in clean energy grew to their highest level yet, driven by large increases in union-dense construction and utility employment. Energy employers reported less difficulty in hiring qualified workers than the previous year. All right, so the bold-face part of the summary that I just read talks a lot about job growth and that union-represented labor were participating in this job growth, which is interesting and key. So I think that there may be a lengthy series that you and I could do at some point in the future. I mean, we've kind of been a little bit on pause in our globalization series and talking about the first half of the 20th century, talking about the wars and political systems that came into existence. And one of the things that was an outgrowth of the 19th century and industrialization was the advent of the labor union or the trade union or the these different types of ways to talk about organized labor and different structures therein. And so when we think about a project going on in the country and who will work on it, it turns out that one of the key stakeholders / human resources for highly skilled, high technical labor are labor unions. Yeah. And it's because they have their own built-in training systems for teaching people how to be carpenters who build concrete forms, for being electricians, for obviously wiring things up that are going into an energy.
Yeah, they create standards and guidelines within their own organization, which are pre-qualifiers to a baseline of professional skills within that trade. So automatically that lends itself to a framework where the government doesn't need to do this. It's if the union is a good functioning union that's properly organized, they're vetting some of that skill and labor for the government. And so, I totally agree with where you're going with this. Yeah.
And so you'll hear about pipe fitters unions and steel workers unions and so forth. Yeah, they're all going to be involved in this type of infrastructure construction because every part of a new piece of DOE infrastructure is a integrated piece of civil engineering and electrical and mechanical engineering. And all of these things come together to make these reliable, long-lasting structural segments of an overall national strategy for. And our former professor used to say it this way. She never said Americans really care about whether or not they have electricity at home. It doesn't matter to them. They don't care about the infrastructure. They don't care about the plant. They don't care about loads. They don't care about any of this stuff. Here's what they care about. We care about a couple of things. Can I keep my beer cold? Can I get a hot shower at the end of my workday? Does my television set work? And do the electrical appliances that my family uses to feed themselves operate effectively?
Yeah.
We only care about the end user conditions. And then
is my AC working? Is my heater working?
Bingo.
Is my AC working in the summer? Is my heater working in the winter? Yep. Is my hot water cooler or my hot water tank and my HVAC system, are all those things working? Yes. Does my refrigerator work? Yeah.
The noble cause that Pearson and I have embraced has been, yes, we care about that. We know that that's what's valued, and we want to know how to sustain that level of quality of life broadly and for as long as we possibly can sustain it, because it has made such a difference in the quality of life for Americans very broadly. This country used to live with some pretty stratified haves and have-nots. And it was through the mid-century post-World War II where we began to see this emergence of a much more populous middle class and people that had greater and greater access to more sophisticated education and better paying careers and healthier, or more access to healthcare and to healthier and
labor unions
lives.
Rose. It's not coincidental that labor unions were also on the rise as we saw these societal changes take place within the American system. Hey, Richard, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you actually have to move to your left now a little bit. You've gone full. Yep, there we go. Perfect.
I hope everybody enjoys that.
It's a little shuffle. Anyways, yeah, no, it's not a surprise that we saw the rise of of those conditions with the rise of labor unions, and now we're seeing. I mean, with the amount, like the need for trades is rising within the U.S. We're even seeing Gen Z, a lot more trade school applications, a lot more going into the trades, and they should, right? Like college has been overhyped to a degree. There are some areas of schooling that the industry is a little hot on that probably are that'll be cooling down as it should be. It's funny when I think of myself as a renewable energy engineer, what I always look at is like we're balancing the output, the energy outputs a little bit more than they were before. Like if you saw our energy production, there were severe problems, and I mean it was unavoidable at the time, but we were so beholden to petrol in general as our general and some form of hydrocarbon to be our output, our fuel outputs for all this energy generation, whether it be oil, coal, or natural gas. Like it was just too much reliance on one subsect of energy, where we really need to have a plethora and a wide spectrum of dynamic energy sources that make up a healthy grid. And I very much include nuclear in there. I think it deserves a good 20 to 25% hunk of our local generation within the U.S., which is why when we mentioned the Advance Act in a different episode, that was really cool legislation. And check out whichever episode that is where we talk about nuclear power. It's like episode 22.
Check them all out.
Check them all. You should watch them all and just wait for that one Advance Act drop. Anyways, so yeah.
So I want to read a little more of our executive summary here. I think if folks know us well enough by now, they know I'm loath to read an entire white paper in front of the camera here. And
That's
also,
right.
I can't really read anyways. I'm faking my way through it. Am I right? U.S. energy sector jobs grew 3% in 2023, outpacing solid overall U.S. employment growth by 50%. Throwing a couple percentages in there, but when energy sector jobs grow 3%, that outpaces the overall employment growth by 50%, right? So that means overall employment growth would have grown 1.5%. Am I doing my percentages right?
At least less than 3.
Yes, less than 3. Energy sector employment increased by over 250,000 from 8.1 million total energy jobs. So 8.1 existed, another 250,000 were added to that.
Nice.
In 2022, and it arrived at 8.35 million in 2023. Clean energy employment increased by 142,000 jobs, accounting for more than half, 56%, of new energy sector jobs and growing at a rate of 4.2%, twice as large as that of the rest of the energy sector. And the U.S. economy overall, 2%. All right, that's a lot of percents and numbers in there. Let's just say that when we talk about the addition of 142,000 jobs, this is pretty big. What's 1% of our population? We're a little over 300 million people now. So
35 million. So we're what are we at?
So when we talk,
yeah.
So when we talk about increasing by this number of jobs, it's non-trivial. That's several medium-sized U.S. cities right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the city where I own property is about 25,000 people. So yeah, that would go a long way to employing a lot of people just in that town alone, for example.
Yeah, 3.5 mil. Yeah, those are good numbers. Yeah, it's funny because I just think of like how many, like I was just recently talking to a guy who he is a field engineer technician who works for he's a subcontractor of Intel. So they work on laser etching. And so he services their laser etching hardware and this is just one business of thousands that are required for Intel to create its chips, right? There's 1,000 different jobs that are all some form of technical vocational experience required from an associate's level up to your PhD levels. And I was talking to him, and he's getting deeper and deeper into semiconductor manufacturing and fabrication. And he's saying like the amount of electrical engineers they need and what they're willing to pay if we're anybody who is still going to school right now and they're flirting with electrical engineering or renewable energy engineering, the semiconductor industry is extremely hot. It's only heating up, and there's buttloads and buttloads of money coming in from the CHIPS Act to the U.S. right now, between Samsung, TSMC, all these huge chip powerhouses that are, moving to Arizona, moving to Portland, moving to these places. Semiconductors is where it's at as well. Just to say, as far as more energy jobs, that's energy adjacent, I would say.
Let's see here. ENGR 465 is the course listing for the senior project fall term. So first term of capstone project for our electrical engineering and renewable energy majors. There are 23 students in a 25 slot class that could have 25 students in it. So it's essentially full. And I have interacted with the majority of them for the last couple of weeks. The term started on the 23rd of September. And so the different project ideas that these students are interested in working on range from microcontrollers for automating sensor systems and pump systems, that type of thing.
Very good.
I was talking to a couple of a renewable energy major partnered with an electrical engineering major who wants to develop one of those reactors where if your inputs are carbon dioxide and methane, you can run those across a catalyst and get yourself some proper methanol or some type of other energy-rich fuel source. Yeah, so they want to get together and create a pressure vessel and the automation that goes into this type of thing. So our university may very well send 23 ready and roaring to go electrical engineers and renewable energy majors at the end of this year. And that should be several hundred. I wish that number could be in the hundreds.
Yeah.
It's just going to be modest for a little while, but wow, if only people knew what this white paper meant, what it represented.
Well,
so I'm glad that we're broadcasting about this today.
And not to brag, but I know my graduating class, at the time, the official number for electrical engineers out of college that they were getting paid in Portland was like $65,000 an average out of college pay. That pay hadn't really shifted for 10 years. My graduating class, and this is just anecdotal, but I mean, I graduated with 24 people, so I talked to pretty much all of them. We were in the same class. When you go to the renewable energy class and you're with the same 24 students for every class every day for a couple of years, you know everybody. Anyways, it was well over $73,000. I don't think I heard a single salary under $73,000 starting for any of them. And this is not to out anybody, but and it was that or higher. We're talking about people right out of college. So the industry has adjusted. I was paid well over that starting. I am older and a little bit wiser with a little bit more facial hair. So that might have been why I got paid a little bit more, but it's probably because I moved to California and I begged that I wouldn't be able to afford my apartment if they didn't pay me enough. And so no, I'm joking. I got a couple battery job interviews and leveraged their insane private equity pay that they were throwing at me to get a better salary from the company I work with now.
All right, so I've been talking about all these percentages and numbers of jobs being created in the last year. And let me just let me get at a couple of things down here in the bottom of this. Oh, let's do the key findings actually.
Yeah, that is a good
I'll read
section.
the bullet points and the key findings. So jobs added in 2023 were 250,000 plus, so 250,000 jobs in the energy sector, which now employs 8.35 million. So it was a lower number before. Now it's 8.35 million with that 250,000 additional jobs. So 8.35 million is a substantial, non-trivial number of people working in this country.
Well, just for reference, the jobs report came out this last week, and it came in hot at like 254,000 or 250 something amount of jobs. Now, this is, of course, an estimate that it's not hard numbers. There's not hard data on this. This is based on some other aggregated data points that they're getting, but I don't think they have to revise these often. But it was still, it's a good reference point to give you an idea that the energy sector alone last year would have made up for one whole month of job sector growth like this one that we just had last month. So that's pretty cool as far as being one piece of the pie of job growth right there.
All right. So clean energy is driving job growth in the energy sector. Now, so just in case anybody's in case I'm slurring my words too much and having too much of a lisp, clean energy is different from energy. They are part of a matrix, they're part of a portfolio, but clean energy is going to be a type of energy that is created by wind, solar, hydro, some other type of thing that does not consume a hydrocarbon fuel, such as coal or natural gas.
Unless it's blue hydrogen or gray hydrogen, is neutral. So I don't know if that's a gray zone necessarily, but blue hydrogen would go also under there. And that it also includes methane capture as well.
Yeah.
So, so we can throw in our waste management friends there. Speaking of a union, that is big in the energy sector these days for methane capture. I know waste management's big there. So
I don't have it here in front of me, but do you remember if nuclear qualifies as clean energy or not?
It should, but it doesn't, I believe. Right. In fact, hydro didn't for a while, but that was because something to do with concrete pour or something, I believe. But hydro wasn't even considered renewable energy up until Ron Wyden, our senators, actually our local, and both our Oregon senators were able to push along with some other officials to get micro hydro labeled as renewable energy finally in like 2022, I believe.
All right. So clean energy is driving job growth in the energy sector. That's the distinction I wanted to make. Motor vehicle jobs are growing, and the most rapid growth is in clean, zero emission vehicles.
EVs.
There you go. Jobs in battery electric vehicles are growing more rapidly than hybrid and plug in hybrid vehicles. That's a distinction that maybe Pierce and I really understand, but might be lost in the public. And that is that if you build an automobile and it has a solely as an EV automobile, in other words, it has an onboard battery pack, it has electric motors, and it must be plugged in to charge. That is different from a hybrid vehicle, which has an ICE gas motor
still,
in it.
Yeah, and still has an internal
combustion engine. You still put gas in it, but its powertrain involves electric motors and batteries. So wind and solar employment grew at rates well above average, and solar became more diverse and more heavily unionized. Like to hear that. And let's see. Here we go. Well, you and I and our Latino brothers and sisters, Latin and Hispanic workers and veterans saw significant gains in the energy sector.
I saw that as well.
And so that's a few of the bullet points on page 8 of this report from the executive summary. And I think that if I were to put a pin in it here, I want the audience to know that the executive summary continues for several more pages. It goes...
I know. Yeah, I read the whole report. It was awesome.
Right. It's a this is the key findings segment of the executive summary, and so it's lengthy. The total document is 221 pages long, and it's the cure for insomnia for sure. But there's so many great things about what's happening in the energy sector and clean energy sector that really matter to American infrastructure. I want the audience to know that one of my major intolerable experiences about coming back from Iraq, being an Iraq War veteran, and living in this country following that deployment was the extent to which we were focusing on prosecuting wars abroad and ignoring our home infrastructure. Now, I have a more nuanced understanding of what it means to prosecute a war abroad and what that means geopolitically and so forth. And I could talk to that from a different perspective and sort of the energy I bring to that conversation. But this, as a salve, as a corrective to that, this means a lot to me. This is huge. And it's the reason why I chose a career, not just in education, where I work now, but specifically the career in education around energy and renewable energy. And so this is finally, we're paying off, man. This is the essence of what I got into this game to do. And it sounds like you did too.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. It's one of those things. I even remember complaining about this after the housing crisis, right? Like, you know, I think there was a growing sentiment, and it grew to a large boil with the rise of the Tea Party movement in 2010s, and just upset with the recovery of the establishment, while a lot of people who lost their homes and stuff didn't really ever recover. You know, they felt like. No. But we saw, you know, the stock market go back up, and everyone said, look how good everything is. And it really took, you know, an extra decade of decay and, you know, a stint of flirtation with some Trumpism for us to kind of finally go, enough's enough. We need to start our California's on fire. The West Coast is on fire. Our grid is failing every summer on the West Coast. Texas on a good news story, I guess, for everybody, and Texas residents especially, is that they're going to be connecting to MISO. Did you hear that? Texas is connecting to an ISO. And when I say MISO, I think the M stands for Missouri. I don't know. Or Mississippi. I don't know. It looks like it follows the Mississippi River. It's a really weird looking ISO. So let's see. MISO.
And we're going to need you to specify what the ISOs and MISOs mean. I know what they are, but I want the audience to know that we're talking about these regional grids.
Energy MISO. All right. Sorry to Google. Let's see. The MISO history is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So that is the Mid-Continent ISO. ISO is Independent System Operator. So up until just a couple days ago, our country had ISOs. For instance, the West Coast ISO is CAISO, the California one. And that includes Oregon, California, Idaho, Washington, and a couple others. It's I think the biggest ISO by area. But there's other ones that manage the grid in their region. And ERCOT, which is the Texas one, was its own independent little thing. And we've talked about ERCOT a couple times. But to give you an idea, the energy grid at ERCOT up until about 4 years ago was about a 1930s grid, comparatively to the rest of the U.S. grid infrastructure. And over the last 4 years, it's upgraded to about a 1970s grid now, which is where it's at, roughly like 1970s, 1980s level grid. Now, this is a large problem as the extreme weather due to climate change has hit Texas rather hard. If you're a Texan, you understand this, whether it be winters, completely freezing energy infrastructure to the point where your guys' energy bills spike to exorbitant tens of thousands of dollars, to summers where you have blackouts and power lines are being melted and all those other bad things that come from extreme climate events. Now, because ERCOT is a free energy grid, it's very similar to like New Zealand's system, except for less regulated. It's a free market energy system, which allows for really cheap energy when everything's working well and super expensive energy for when shit hits the fan. The problem is shit's hitting the fan in Texas too much. And so it's come time for them to connect to the greater grid to probably increase stability, and this will most likely require a lot of federal oversight and more regulations to facilitate the upgrade of the electrical grid in Texas. So looks like we're going to be handing out a lot of federal money, a lot of handouts to Texas. Go figure. I'm sure they'll accept it very thankfully and gratefully, and they won't talk about welfare and other things.
It's interesting. Let's see, how does that phrase go? There are people of a conservative persuasion who are possessed of a lot of internal inconsistency and hypocrisy.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance.
I have the Bureau of Labor and Statistics page up in front of me here, and I just thought I would. I want to note that. Just to give us a perspective, in April of 2020, April of 2020, we know what a historical month that was. Unemployment was at 14.8%. It rapidly readjusted and began to drop. Unemployment began to fall, and people were employed very rapidly thereafter. And by December of 2020, the rate had fallen to 6.7%. At its low point, see here, let's just go with July and August of 2022, it was at 3.6.
Whoa.
It's increased slightly. The rate is back up to 4.3 as of July of 2024. So, unemployment is doing its classic thing where it jiggles and oscillates.
It's waffling. Okay.
It's not the only economic indicator. There are lots of economic indicators, but unemployment rate is the United States is always going to have an unemployment rate. It basically is baked into the pie. We kind of can't not have it.
Most countries have unemployment rates. Yeah. Besides China, which.
And there are people who constitute the unemployed who are exactly they're doing the right thing. They should not be employed. That it doesn't mean they're totally disabled or something is totally wrong with them or whatever. It just means that they're in the right place. They do not need to be in an industry of any kind. But for the most part, people who want to get a job have been able to get one for the past 2 years pretty easily. Just to give us some perspective, unemployment, February of 2020 was 3.5%. So it's a little higher than right before the beginning of the pandemic. But 3.5% was the low point of a gradual, like the graph goes like this for a long time from its high point of 9.8 in 2010.
Yeah.
So immediately following the housing market crisis and the financial crisis, there was a real spike in November 2010 to 9.8. The January 2010 was 9.8. So it lingered in the high nines for several months in 2010. But the trend downward began apace in 2011. And over the next 9 years, it hit 3.5, right before the pandemic happened. So, barring that little blip in history, we would basically be on track. I mean, it might have gone even lower yet. Maybe that blip in history creates something that gives us even better possibilities in the future. I'm just talking about a graph. I'm looking at a picture. If you'd like to see this yourself, you may go to www.bls.gov and choose unemployment statistics.
Yeah, it looks like with the baby boomers retiring and them being the largest generation out of the market, that we're probably going to experience pretty low unemployment numbers for at least the next decade until Generation Alpha starts to emerge from its pubescent life stage into the rough and tumble world of hyper capitalism. Welcome. You're in the Thunderdome of ultimate capitalism. That's what America represents. We are the best at it. And it's like getting into a high stakes game of poker. No, it's not that bad. Listen, in this day and age, a lot of things have been demonized, which should not be demonized. And I'm going to tell you right now, the 9-to-5 white collar job should not be demonized. It's super chill. It's super easy. It's not that bad. Like a 9-to-5, I don't know what they've sold you. So here's the thing. When you're growing up, a 9-to-5 represents most likely a blue collar job or a retail job or a service industry job. And I can tell you from vast wealth of experience doing all of those things, and then joining the military service on top of that, which is not a 9-to-5. I can tell you that right there. Yeah, those jobs suck. That's not a 9-to-5 that's not a 9-to-5 career job. There's a difference. When you pick your career, if you get into the white collar labor force, that's different than the tough ass service job that you have where you're probably servicing people through the waiting industry or whatever, retail or whatever. Like those aren't fun jobs. Yeah, those are awful. And those should not be something you're looking forward to. But don't let that solely the experience of what a 9-to-5 white collar job is. I can't speak for banking, but I can say for engineering consulting, it's pretty awesome.
And to give some perspective, there's kind of a, I don't know, there's always going to be what my boomer parents would call scofflaws and other types of shirkers and people who are just capital L lazy. They love denigrating a person's desire to rest and recuperate as being problematic in them, because how dare they? When we talk about a labor practice that has a set number of working hours, there's a couple of things that are different now. Well, let's first do the contrast, which was before we had labor protections, before we had labor unions, before we had this movement.
There were no such thing as worker rights.
No.
Yeah.
We didn't have a 2-day weekend. People would get Sunday morning off because worship was important enough to employers to send their labor force to church, and maybe they got a few hours on Sunday beyond worship time, but they worked Saturdays. They worked Monday through Saturdays. They worked Monday through Saturdays, 12 and 14-hour days. This was de rigueur, and it was normal, and it was expected. And if you didn't work at this rate, you were considered lesser. Like that was, you were degraded by this what do they call that? Protestant work ethic attitude. That's a myth, by the way. Do not think that I subscribe to that. And so once we had some real adjustments to labor standards, later on the Bureau of Labor and Industry came into existence. I have a poster here at work that tells me what my rights are as a person who's working.
So yeah, the 1930s, I mean, we could say the 1930s is when really labor protections started to hit pretty hard. We see a wealth of labor protections during that period of time, through FDR, through to Truman, afterwards. And then you saw more labor protection under JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson, because then you had public broadcast and the Civil Rights Act. So then suddenly you saw even more labor protections for minorities as well, because we had, so there was a lot of labor protections that really started to kick off in the 30s. But yeah.
So when you talk about a 9-to-5 job, it can be easy to think of that as being this
forever fixture.
Because it feels, one, like it's been around forever, and two, it feels like the kind of thing that so I have a friend that works in dentistry. That's what I'll do, is I'll just create a square called dentistry. So that means there's doctors of dentistry, and there are people who are hygienists, and there are people who are support staff in this. So I have a friend who works in this helping profession sector.
Yeah,
and they work kind of brutal days. Those days start at 7 with the expectation that there is prep work being done before 7 a.m. and they might see the end of their workday sometime a little after 6 p.m., oftentimes after 7 p.m. And a lot of that has to do with the business model of the private dentistry practice, where, in production mindset, you need to move a lot of people through your offices through the course of a day, and then that translates to the bottom line of the business's the performance.
Yeah,
because the higher density the customer per day is, the greater the profit margin for the investors and the board and people who are involved in the operation of the company, obviously. And the problem is that in the helping profession of dentistry, there's a labor shortage. It's not for everybody, so we're already talking about a select number of people who are going to work here, and those who do the job are passionate about doing it, and they're a small segment of the labor force totally. And so what we're seeing is, like, in these situations where this should be one of those 9-to-5 jobs, but it's not, they're not running it that way. They're running it much more like these older school production jobs where you work 12 and 14-hour days.
I see that. I mean, it's funny because I got a bunch of dental work done to make up for your dental insurance, which is the inverse way that health insurance works, by the way, which is always just a fun little thing where instead of you paying deductibles that you have to get through in health insurance, you have a deductible pool of money that they will reduce from your dental bill. And once you've used it up, you need to wait till next year to do the rest of your dental work. So anyways, I was getting all that done. And shout out to my dentist, Dr. Lee. He's legit. he owns his own practice. He manages a couple other dentists there, and then the whole hygienist team, the dental assistants, the front desk. I mean, it's this guy. I don't know. He looks like he's 45. He doesn't look old at all, and he is working his ass off. Not to mention doing dental work while he's doing all my dental work. He's over there going, hey, make sure Jose gets off early because he's got a 2-hour drive to Sacramento because hygienists have to, drive a long ways because it's so expensive here, even if they're getting paid probably pretty decently here. They're not getting paid big tech wages because if you're a dental hygienist, if you don't work in big tech in the Bay Area, you're underpaid. If you're a doctor here, you're underpaid. If you're a nurse in the Bay Area, you're underpaid. Your wages have not kept up with the inflated value of housing prices. So if you come here to be a doctor, they either have to pay you way more than they would anywhere else, and you're still not making what that software engineer who got out of college 2 years ago is making straight out of college for not knowing he could code hello world, but he just happened to pick the perfect profession in the perfect storm in Bay Area during 0% interest rates for 10 years in the Silicon Valley. So anyways, a lot of
we got into this idea of a 9-to-5 job being you're trying to de-vilify it, and you're absolutely right. When it comes to the way labor was, what you're describing is way better. It's a significantly better experience for us. Where it probably gets the opposition, the oppositional opinion, is that what's being grouped in with it is these sectors of the economy where there are labor shortages, where people aren't really able to. There's a couple of things at play here, which is they're being kept at a work frequency that doesn't make them full time and therefore available for benefits.
Yeah,
they're not accruing paid time off, and they're not accruing other health insurance benefits. And so their labor is being exploited in a way that gets through a loophole.
Absolutely.
And they're thinking, well, this is a 9-to-5 job. They work half a day on Fridays or whatever it is that keeps them below that 40-hour rate.
And those are 9-to-5 jobs. The difference is I think I see my issues. I see a lot of online influencers who say don't get a 4-year degree. College is stupid. And they just, they immediately say this. They say these really blanket statements, which are they require a lot more nuance, right? And another thing they say is you don't want to work a 9-to-5. And it's I'm with you that there's a 9-to-5 job, and it's a lot of the jobs that you just laid out. And it's the ones that I've talked about and the ones that you and I have worked before, frankly, No, and I am right there with you. Like when you're stocking shelves at Walmart or whatever you're doing, you're working at Mickey D's to working retail at Target or whatever you've had, I mean, the American dream is a lot of working a bunch of shitty jobs. That's part of the dream. It's the nightmare part of the dream, but it's there. Right. What I'm talking about is there are 9-to-5 careers, and those are way different and so much better than, I see that dentist. I wouldn't want to be doing that 12, 15-hour days, but he's doing it and he's managing his business. He's crushing it. Another thing is finding what you're passionate in. I mean, that is huge for making your career. Your 9-to-5 feels a lot better if you're doing something you like to do. And my boss is pretty legit. I mean, I hope he doesn't ever see this, but he's good. He's a good boss. And so I don't have an asshole boss either. And I work for a decent company as well, especially for a Fortune 500 large ass corporation. They're pretty good. So I could say that all of these things are, I just could be very lucky in that I like my job and that I'm in a good situation. But I've had asshole bosses before, especially when I was in the Army. Had some good bosses in the Army too, but there was definitely a couple assholes there.
So I thought it would be a good idea to look up Bureau of Labor and Industries, and what came up was Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. And I have a feeling that what I thought was a federal agency might just be a state agency, and I just haven't delved into it deep enough yet. But the current commissioner is Christina Stevenson, replacing Val Hoyle, who was elected to Oregon's 4th Congressional District in 2022. History In 1903, the Oregon Legislative Assembly created the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Inspector of Factories and Workshops
Okay.
in response to public concerns about the effects of industrializing on society. How about that? And
Interesting.
so, let's see. Appointed by Governor P. Hoff, the initial appointee, the initial commissioner, was elected in 1906 and reelected in 1910 and 14. So 1903 is the origin of the Bureau of Labor and Industries in the state of Oregon. And not every employer does a very good job of conforming to some of these standards. And not everybody knows that they have to.
Yeah.
But as an employee as a university employee, my labor is monitored and protected as a state agency.
Yes.
And
because
so
you receive, you are paid through some funnel of public funding. It does trickle down to your paycheck.
And so, and not only that, I'm in a protected labor class at the university because I have a labor union. So there's a couple of different things here. And so it is, I speculate, although I'm not entirely sure, that it is a policy of my collective bargaining agreement that those posters be available to me so that I can see them and view them and make sure that I'm getting the right number of breaks per day and that I'm not being prevented from having a lunch and so forth. Like there's all these different things that
other states have done away with. Like Texas and Florida have done away with these protections very recently. Actually, they the water breaks and the proper number of breaks. They've gotten rid of those labor protections. As some linemen and technicians from other states who've come down to Texas have found out over the summer, when they were like, "Dude, I'm out." I saw a bunch of videos of them just leaving because they were like, "This sucks." So it's good to know that. Go ahead.
There are no jobs that are worth working if you're just being exploited. There are really hard jobs that are really rewarding that you're well taken care of while you're doing it. Totally worth it. But when you are just chattel to the people that are running that project, the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves is create within ourselves and our cohort, our network of people that we care about, to create within those people the ability to say, no, I will not be exploited in your dangerous working conditions.
Yeah.
Because that is the only way to make them change.
No, labor rights are super important. And I think they've become intertwined to the American experience ever since the 1930s. And those people had way harder fights. They died for the labor rights that we have now. They literally died and were bullied and shot, and we're these. So it's good that Oregon and California has some of the best labor protections in the country. By the way, some of the best. There's reason some of the best. It's insane. And actually, they protect the family unit with a tax. We have some of the lowest tax rates on families here too as well. So surprisingly, when people talk about high taxes, California has some high taxes, but if you're starting a family, pretty low taxes. Not that you could buy a house unless you're a millionaire, but that's a different problem for a different episode for us to talk about. It looks like we're at the witching hour. So
it looks like it. So it looks like the way that we covered this episode, we got into some of the history of labor.
Yeah, we did. We got into
mid-century.
Yeah, we got into history of labor, and we talked about what's happening with the energy grid. We're talking about advancements and upgrades to the grid that we're doing right now, to the energy sector, what's happening in labor. Yeah, it was a really good, even though we didn't talk about the 1930s too much or what was happening there, I feel like this is a good little cursory. We don't need to dwell on it anymore. I think next time we can talk about the Marshall Plan a little bit. I think it's really important in our next section for globalization that we cover that. Maybe Brentwoods and Marshall, those two together.
Yeah. We keep threatening to get into that Bretton Woods, and I know the public is just waiting on tenterhooks to hear us talk at length about the gold standard being.
Maybe it just needs to be a 10-minute conversation. We will rock right through. We go Bretton Woods and then into the Marshall, UN, United Nations, NATO, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. We're good to go. Anyways, hey, if to our audience out there, thanks for watching. We appreciate you following along with us. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to what we're doing. You can email us at XY Chromies CU at gmail.com. I think that's it. Oh God. It's the link is in our description. How about that? If you have any suggestions, you want to talk to us, whatever. Yeah, it's been a really good time. We're really enjoying ourselves. So
this is a good forum for us to talk about things that are, I want to say, not only important to the American experience, but they're important to the experience of Americans in the future who we want them to know how to build and perfect a better civilization than even the one that they came from, because we have plenty of terrific flaws and therefore projects and opportunities to work on to perfect our civilization. And our discussions hopefully lead towards that.
Yeah, or provide some good entertainment on the pathway there. So, all right, Richard, it's been a pleasure, and I'll talk to you and see you next time.
Right on, Pearson. Great talking with you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.